from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Rev Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast. I'm Rev Charles Harrison, and on today's episode, we will be talking about, does Indianapolis have a juvenile violence problem in the city? Let's talk about that today. Hello, this is Rev Charles Harrison, and this is Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And I'm here today to talk about an issue that is really seeming like it's starting to get worse in the city. Now I'm talking about from my perspective as someone who has been on the front line in the whole violence issue in Indianapolis for really the last 25 years. I pastor a church on the west side of Indianapolis, Barnes United Methodist Church. And I decided 25 years ago, along with a lot of other pastors, to get involved in the violence issue that was impacting, I felt like, even the church community. We were seeing violence in our communities, right in front of the church, behind the church, a block or two away. And many of us pastors like myself felt like, well, we really needed to get involved in helping to curb the level of violence in the city. And I think from 1999 through about 2012, I think the role that the faith community played in partnership with the city and law enforcement and other grassroots organizations in neighborhoods across the city, we did a good job. We saw in Indianapolis violence being reduced, and we averaged about 96 homicides over that period of time from about 1999 to about 2012, and around 115, I would say, homicides a year. When we got over 100 murders a year, it was a crisis in the city. What is really striking this year is not so much, it's not only, let me say this, that we have seen 8 consecutive years of the highest level of violent crimes in the history of Indianapolis. We have now had 4 consecutive years over 200 homicides a year. But what is startling this year in 2023 is that we have now broken a juvenile homicide record in the city. This is stunning. This is troubling. That now in the city of Indianapolis, we have seen what I believe is a dramatic increase in the level of juvenile violence. Just yesterday in the city, we had a 16-year-old in the city yesterday trying to buy a gun from an adult. In the car with the 16-year-old was a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. The 18-year-old now is considered an adult, but you had 2 what we consider juveniles, a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old. And then there was an adult woman who was trying to sell a gun to the 16-year-old. In the midst of the transaction, 16-year-old takes the gun, gets in the car, drives off. The woman who was trying to sell the gun gets in her car, follows. A shootout occurs. And apparently the woman ended up shooting the 2 passengers in the car with the 16-year-old who happened to be driving the car, shot the 17-year-old and the 18-year-old with non-life-threatening injuries. The day before, at a basketball game in Lawrence, between Lawrence North and Lawrence Central, shots were fired based on some kind of altercation in the parking lot at the game. And police ended up arresting a 14, catch this, and 15-year-old with a gun. Not only with a gun that they had, but they had some kind of switch on the gun. So people are beginning to scratch their head in the city, and people are asking the question, where are all of these juveniles getting guns? This becomes the question. Not only where are the juveniles getting the gun, other people are now starting to ask the question, where are the parents at? We now have juveniles with guns, and now we're trying to figure out where are the parents at when it comes to all of these juveniles who have guns, who are committing crimes with guns, who are committing murders with guns. It's not just the boys that have the guns, but we now have teenage girls with guns. So where are all of these guns coming from? Why does there seem to be easy access to guns, particularly in the urban core that juveniles have, which by law, it is unlawful for them to have legally as a juvenile? So we have all of these guns on the streets. We're seeing violence at the highest level since I have been doing the work of 10 Point. I go out at least 2 or 3, 4 nights a week, depending on how busy I am during the week. I have never seen this level of juvenile violence in all of my 25 years of doing this work as a, what the kids, young people call me an OG on the street, or a pastor who is a crime fighter on the streets. I walk 2, 3, 4 nights a week, and I see juveniles with guns. I've never seen these many juveniles with guns. They have guns. You see the extended magazines that these juveniles have, and they're all walking around with these weapons as we're trying to engage them. They give us various reasons when we're out talking to them about the guns as to why they have the guns, certainly trying to justify, but certainly they have the guns. We're seeing more violence. We're seeing more young people with these guns. We've had more homicides. And I said in an interview yesterday that I did with Fox 59 and CBS 4 that I think that this is only going to get worse. I believe that this is going to get worse. I believe that more and more young people are going to feel the need to have a gun, and more young people are going to use those guns. It may be because of an interpersonal conflict or to be involved in some kind of criminal act, and people are going to get killed. More juveniles are going to get killed. More innocent individuals are going to get killed. We have had several teens that have been killed this year who have gotten killed because they got caught in the crossfire. Many of these teens have no regard for the sanctity of human life. They don't care about their life. They don't care about your life. And many of them don't believe that they're going to live beyond their early to mid-20s. Isn't that troubling? Well, there are several questions that I want to ask on this podcast today, and for us to have a conversation about it, because I believe that the city is in a public safety crisis. But I also believe that the city is experiencing a juvenile public safety crisis also, in the midst of the overall larger public safety crisis that we are seeing with adults in this city. So we have several problems that are going on in Indianapolis all at the same time. We have a public safety crisis with adults, and now we have a public safety crisis with teens. I am the father of 2 teenagers. I have an 18-year-old son. I have a 16-year-old daughter who's going to be turning 17 in a few more days. I am afraid for my children. I'm afraid for my children because of the climate and the environment and the world that they're living in today. I'm afraid sometimes as a parent to let them go places because I know that there is a proliferation of guns on the street in the hands of youth. And I don't want my children to be anywhere that they may be caught in a crossfire, where they may be the victim of violence, because they may be somewhere and a fight may break out, a shootout may break out, and I'm concerned that my kids may be the victim of being hit by a stray bullet. I should not fear that way as a parent, but I do because of the work that I do and because of what I see every night on the news here in Indianapolis about violence in our city, and particularly violence that is also impacting our children. There are several questions I want to ask today on this podcast, and let's talk about it. Well, do we have a juvenile problem in Indianapolis and Marion County? I don't think you can just talk about Indianapolis. I think you also have to talk about Lawrence, which is where we had the shots fired at the basketball game the other night in the city. I think you also have to talk about Speedway and Indianapolis. And certainly if you look at the numbers this year, we have had more homicides in the city and the county of juvenile homicides, 17 and under, than any other time in the history of this city. So that would tell us, yes, we do have a juvenile violence problem. Not only that, but you have more guns in the hands of juveniles, in my opinion, probably than in the history of Indianapolis and Marion County. So we have a twofold problem. We have a problem with gun violence, the number of homicides that we have experienced this year in Indianapolis and Marion County when it comes to juveniles 17 and under being killed. We've had a number of cases where juveniles have been shot. Shots have been fired by juveniles in the city and in the county. So we cannot be in denial about the reality of what's going on in Indianapolis, and that is we do have a juvenile violence problem in the city. I wish many of our elected officials would be more vocal about this issue, would say more about it publicly, rather than too many times we're having these incidents occur in our city and we hear nothing from the elected officials in the city to begin to talk about this issue and to begin to talk about what can we do. Here's the second question that I like to pose. This is Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network with Rev Charles Harrison. Is the city, law enforcement, judges, prosecutor, and his office, community groups, faith-based groups, doing enough to address this public safety crisis of juvenile violence in the city? Now, I want to be careful here in how I answer this because I am a part of particularly the faith-based community with 10 Point in trying to address this issue. I do believe that there are a lot of groups out in the city, both community and faith-based groups, that are trying their best to address this issue. I do believe that law enforcement, particularly IMPD, are doing their best to address this issue. The city of Indianapolis has invested around $15 million a year in trying to address the issue of public safety in Indianapolis. As I've said earlier, we have now had 4 consecutive years of 200 plus homicides in the city. One would ask the question, is what we are doing working? I do believe that IMPD is doing a good job of apprehending violent felons and juveniles who are committing violent crimes are possessing unlawful weapons. I think probably where the disconnect is that I don't think the judges and the prosecutor and the prosecutor's office is doing a good job of holding juveniles accountable. So if we're not going to hold juveniles accountable who are involved in violent behavior, who possess unlawful guns, then there is no real accountability there. Now, I know some are going to argue with me, but it is disproportionately impacting communities of color. I do know that. I am aware of that. I am a part of communities of color. I pastor a black church. I am aware of that. I've had members who have had children who have been killed, who have had cousins killed, who have had nephews and nieces killed. I am aware of that. But I also am aware of the pain that I see that's being caused by this senseless violence in our city. I am aware. I have been in the room, in the church, in the hospital, on the scene of violent crimes where you have grieving parents who are grieving and family members because they have a juvenile that is laying on the ground with a blanket over them because they have been killed. Now, do we give the 16 or 17-year-old a pass for killing someone? Well, no, we don't do that. But part of the problem is the system are not holding them accountable when they are committing lesser crimes that ultimately, without any accountability, is going to lead to more violent crimes. So part of the problem is, I think, because of the escalation that we're seeing in juvenile violence in the city, is that we don't have a collaborative effort by the city, law enforcement, judges, prosecutor's office, community groups, faith-based groups, in working together to address the issue of public safety and finding common ground around that issue. Yes, everybody's doing something. And I know that CICF is trying to provide collaborations through the money that they're giving from the City County Council and the City of Indianapolis for public safety, but yet there is no real coordination between all of the what we would call community stakeholders in working together. We cannot have efforts on the ground, but then there is no accountability or revolving door when it comes to our courts and the prosecutor's office, or there is no real accountability for violent crimes being committed and the people are arrested and put right back out on the street. So one of the problems is, I think, that the city, law enforcement, judges, prosecutor, community groups, and faith-based groups are not on one accord. We do not all agree about what is the best approach to addressing this issue, and that is a big part of what the problem is in the city. I think the second issue is how we're allocating resources to address the problem. I don't think we have done it in the best way. I don't think it has been done with best practices, with what's working in some other urban cities across the country. And I think that if we don't realize that we got to change how we're dealing with this, because if we're not reaching the young people who are committing the violence, then it's not going to have much of an impact if we put $20 million on the street, if we're not reaching the individuals, the teens who are most likely to be the victims or the perpetrators of these violent crimes. Let's talk a little bit about the third thing I wanted to bring up. What's driving the teen violence in Indianapolis? And I think this is really a big issue. And I think there are two things that I believe that is driving it. I think several things. I think one is that we have seen a great cultural shift in our society today, where teen violence is being glorified in a lot of different ways. The music, I think in the videos, in the overall culture, it is a mindset that we're dealing with today, where violence has become acceptable. And we have young people today who have no moral compass and no regard for the sanctity of human life. So there are no lines in the sand. There is no boundary anymore. when it comes to teen violence. And these kids are not, and I call them kids, these juveniles are not afraid to die themselves. And certainly, they have no concern for, your life. And that's just a reality. And we're seeing it play out in a lot of different ways. It used to be most of the violence was centered around drug trafficking and robberies or some kind of criminal activity that was taking place on the streets that led to violence, a bad drug deal, someone trying to rob a drug dealer, or someone who has a lot of money on them, that tended to lead to violence, particularly the drug trafficking and the robberies. We see a lot of that, in the urban core. But now what I think is just as, important for us to focus on is certainly these interpersonal conflicts that's driving the violence. That people are getting into conflicts with one another, whether it be on social media, whether it be an argument that they're having with someone else, and it tends to escalate to violence. They go from 0 to 100 very quickly. Guns are pulled out, and shots are fired, and people end up dead. So I think we have to look at what's driving the violence. Drug trafficking, robberies, and interpersonal conflicts, I think, are the big keys when it comes to juvenile violence in the city. I think the other piece is what's driving the violence is the easy access to unlawful guns. And I don't really want to get into this whole gun debate with people. I just want to give you the facts of what's going on the ground. We can debate this, but the facts going on the ground is that these teens are getting their hands on the guns. I've never seen anything like this. Like I said, I've been doing this for 25 years. I remember when I first started doing this in the late 90s, I would run into a group of 7 or 8 teens, and maybe 1 or 2 of them had a gun. Well, today, I run into 7 or 8 teens, and probably 6 or 7 of them have guns, if not all 8 have guns. That's just the reality today. And people are asking, well, where are they getting these guns? I always talk about the black market, how you're able to buy guns on the street, that people are selling guns on the street. A variety of people are selling guns on the street. Sometimes you can get a gun the same place you buy drugs. That's just the reality. If you know people on the street and what's going on, you'll hear about who's selling guns on the street. So through the black market. Yesterday, as I talked about earlier, we had an adult selling a gun to teens. So we have adults selling guns to teens. We had an incident in Anderson, over a week ago, where we had a parent who bought a gun for their teen because they felt like they needed it for protection. Well, that teen ended up using that gun for other things, and that teen ended up getting killed. So you have the black market, you have adults selling guns, you have sometimes parents buying guns, you have drug dealers that are giving guns out, or people are buying guns from drug dealers. You get sometimes guns within the clique. And then there are these, what I call the hot guns on the street, where these guns have been used in a lot of criminal activity, crimes, and these guns tend to be passed around because they're hot, and they're passed around, and someone may do something with the gun, and then that gun is passed around. Again, the serial number is filed off, and they're passing these guns, from person to person, in the city, in that circle. And I call them these hot guns. You also have guns that are just stolen. There's a lot of stolen guns out there, that people have stolen guns, and those guns tend to be sold on the street and passed around. So you have a proliferation of that in the urban core. And then you have young people, who feel like that I need to buy a gun myself for my own protection. or I need to get a gun for my own protection. So, you got drug trafficking, you have these interpersonal conflicts, you have robberies, you may have some bullying that may go on and someone feels like they need to defend themselves, juveniles. And this was what's leading to the escalation, I believe, in record-breaking juvenile violence in Indianapolis, and also our broken judicial system. So someone asked, well, then Pastor Harrison, what can be done about it? And I think this is where we're having a lot of conversation about it. This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And today I'm talking about the whole issue of the public safety crisis in Indianapolis and Marion County with juvenile violence. I do not think that this is a easy fix, nor is there an easy answer to address the whole issue of the public safety crisis in Indianapolis and Marion County with juvenile violence. Because I believe the problem is complex. I believe it is multi-layered. Certainly, from my perspective, I believe that it starts at home. I think that is the front line of this whole issue. And I think we have a lot of broken homes. I think we have kids that have been born in very difficult circumstances and live in very trying environments or difficult environments. They just do, because of where they live and because of the level of criminal activity and crime and violence in the areas where they live. For some kids who may have no interest in being involved in gangs or in cliques or selling drugs or being involved in criminal activity, when so many kids tend to have guns, when so many kids tend to be involved in some sort of criminal activity, for kids who don't want that, sometimes you hear them talk on the streets is that they're forced to do something they don't want to do. I hear it all the time. Our OGs hear it all the time. And we're trying to help these kids navigate these environments and the circumstances that they're in. Or, they may not have, much parenting going on at home. And we hear this a lot from some of the people who are making comments about this whole issue of juvenile violence. Well, where are the parents at? I know some parents are trying to do their best. I know in other situations, the parents are not doing the best job. I'm saddened that in the Black community, particularly 74% of Black children are born in the single parent household. We have a absence of fathers in a lot of homes. In some homes, we do have fathers, but they're bad role models for their sons and daughters. That is the reality too. In every case, it's not just the absence of fathers. In some cases, they're bad fathers. If the father is out in the street, he's involved in criminal activity or selling drugs, then that becomes a negative influence on the sons and daughters of the father. So it's not just the absence of fathers. We need good fathers, because in a lot of cases, we don't have good fathers in the lives of these juveniles, which is helping to steer them in the wrong direction. I'm a father of 4 children. I have 2 teenage children left in the household. It's not easy raising children today and teens today. But I'm not their friend. I'm their parent. And it's my responsibility and my wife's responsibility for us both to parent our children. We have boundaries. We have rules. We have curfews in the household. And we try our best. We hope that when our kids are not in our presence, that they are practicing what they have been taught and how they have been raised. But I don't let my son and my daughter go anywhere. I don't let my son and daughter just hang out with anyone. And I do believe that parenting is a key part of this. I do know that some parents, because of their work schedule and maybe have to work in the evening to make ends meet, and they're, the only provider, in the household, that sometimes they're not at home and their kids may be left at home, their teen children. And sometimes when your children are left alone, then sometimes they do things that they shouldn't be doing. But I do think that it is an issue that parents have to step up and they have to be the first line of defense. I believe if we had better parenting and more fathers in the household that were positive role models, we would have less teen violence in our city. And if we had that, then we wouldn't have the as greater need for the city and law enforcement and the courts and faith-based groups and community groups to get involved in helping to address this issue. But I do think because those things are missing, then certainly the city, law enforcement, judges, prosecutor's office, community groups, and faith-based groups have to play a role in this. What I'm concerned about and what troubles me is that I don't think enough resources have been put in place to help reach the kids who may not be a part of the church basketball league, who may not be a part of any mentoring program, and we have some good ones in the city, but who are hanging out in the streets, who are selling drugs, who are involved in criminal activity, and who don't want to be a part of any of these amazing programs that we have in the city, but they're just hanging out in the streets. Are they hanging out somewhere? I believe that we have to reach those kids who have the guns, who are most likely to be the shooter, the suspect, or the victim of a violent crime. And we have a lot of juveniles who have no regard for the sanctity of human life, who have no fear of dying, some who have no fear of going to jail, who are committing these crimes out here on the streets. And we have to be able to reach them. I don't believe that they're not reachable, because they are reachable. But I think that we have to go where they are. And I do think that there are some strategies and certain parts of the city where we have seen success in reducing juvenile violence. There are other parts of the city where we haven't had success. Well, where we're having success, why not take what we're doing in those areas of the city and replicate it citywide? Part of my concern and problem is the why we have a juvenile violence problem in the city is that too often we're not doing what works. Whether it's for political reasons, personal reasons, some groups or leaders don't like other leaders, that's irrelevant. The problem that we have is we have kids dying in the streets of Indianapolis. And we ought to put all of that other nonsense aside. It's nonsense. If we have areas of the city that are not experiencing juvenile, young adult, and adult violence at the rate that we're seeing in other parts of the city, let's then replicate what's working in parts of the city where we're having low levels of juvenile violence, young adult violence, and older adult violence in the city. That just makes sense. The police cannot do it by themselves. The city cannot do it by themselves. We need the judges, the courts, community groups, grassroots organizations, churches, and all faith-based groups that are out there involved in crime fighting to be working together, but yet replicating what works in our city. And I do believe that in certain parts of the city, they have been very successful at reducing violence, and we ought to be replicating that. This means that we need to put the resources into the initiatives that are working. We cannot afford this. We cannot, in 2024, exceed the level of juvenile violence that we have seen in 2023. But if we don't address the proliferation of unlawful weapons on the street, if we don't address what's driving these young people, these juveniles, to commit these violent acts, if we're not using best practices, proven initiatives that help to reduce the violence, if we're not going to fix our broken judicial system when it comes to juvenile crime and violence in the city, then the situation in Indianapolis and Marion County is not going to get better. We're going to continue to see high levels of juvenile violence, and more juveniles are going to be killed in this city, and sadly, more innocent juveniles. It is just that bad, Indianapolis. It is just that bad, Marion County. And don't let anybody try to tell you that it's not. Just look at the numbers. Watch the news every night, and you will see that we're in a crisis as a city when it comes to the overall violence, but in particular in 2023, when it comes to juvenile violence in the city of Indianapolis and in Marion County. We have to do more. I want to talk about in my next podcast about some other very concrete things I think that we can do to really help address this issue of juvenile violence. But it is a crisis. And we have to do more in this city to address the public safety crisis that we are experiencing in the city when it comes to juvenile violence. I'm hoping that we come together and begin to talk about what's really driving it so that we can fix it. I know people are talking about the open carrying guns and that you don't have to have a permit now to have a gun. I know that for some people, that's the problem. But if you look at the numbers and be realistic, remember several years ago, 2021, we had 271 homicides in the city. We haven't reached that. That was before what the state did. Don't y'all get so narrowly focused on that issue that you don't see what the real problems are. I'm not saying that's not a problem, but it's not the problem. We have been having a problem in Indianapolis before what the state legislators did in not requiring people to have a permit to carry a gun. That's not what's driving this issue. It's not. There are other driving forces that is driving this issue. And if they reversed it tomorrow and made you get a permit to have a gun, it's not going to reduce the number of guns on the street in the hands of juveniles in the city of Indianapolis if you know how they're getting them. They had them before the law was changed. If the law was changed back, they're going to have them again. We got to address and interdict these guns on the streets and reduce the reason why these kids want to have guns in the first place. We have to focus on that. While some kids who are not involved in criminal activity feel the need to have the gun, we got to make the street safer. And we got to get more of these juveniles out of the street on a pathway of success in life so that they don't feel the need to carry a gun because their lives are going in a different direction. We got to change the culture in our society today that's glorifying this, that's promoting this kind of juvenile violence that we're seeing in our city. We have a lot of work to do, but we're not going to get this work done if we don't do it together. First of all, we got to acknowledge we do have a problem. We have a problem. I'm not going to be silent about it. We have a problem. We're in a crisis. We have a juvenile violence crisis in the city of Indianapolis and in Marion County. We have a few more weeks left in 2023. We're going to have to work our butts off so that in 2024, we don't repeat what we have seen in 2023 or it gets even worse. But obviously what we're doing now isn't working. I know some people are saying, yes, it is. It is not working. It is getting worse. There are more guns on the street. There are more young people who don't have a moral compass, who's not afraid to die, and they have no regard for the sanctity of human life, and they have no boundaries. They don't. They will have a shootout anywhere. That's the reality. That's a fact. So quit telling us things are getting better. They're not getting better. Let's work to make it better. But quit telling us that it's getting better when it's not getting better. We have a crisis. We have a problem in this city when it comes to juvenile violence. We have just broken a record. We had a 16-year-old yesterday trying to buy a gun. We had a 17-year-old and 18-year-old shot. We had a 14 and a 15-year-old the day before that was arrested for firing shots in the parking lot at one of our high schools during a basketball game. I can go on and on about what's going on with juvenile violence in this city. For those who live in Indianapolis and you watch the news, you see it every day on the news. It's on every week about a juvenile being shot, a juvenile being arrested for guns, police stopping juveniles and confiscating guns and assault weapons or rifles, whatever you want to call them. These are 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds that are committing these kind of crimes, who have guns on the street, who have no regard for the sanctity of life. That is the reality in Indianapolis. And I know people may be listening to this podcast from cities all over the country. In every major city in America, we're seeing this problem. We got to do more to address this issue. Thanks so much for listening to me today on my commentary as I've talked about the public safety crisis in Indianapolis when it comes to juvenile violence. Thank you for joining me, for bringing more real talk about the real issues that affect our community here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe to our next episode. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. When you listen to this broadcast, tell someone else about it because, you know, when I say real talk, I'm not afraid, Rev Harrison, and when my co-host is with me, Reverend Terry Webster Sr., we're not afraid to talk about the real issues and give our opinions about what we think is going on. Thank you so much for joining me today on Real Talk. I pray that you have a blessed and an awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.